So I actually meant to make this video a while ago when I did the original Sinbad video, but then I got caught up in doing all the Yu-Gi-Oh videos here on the channel. But going back to Magi, I'm going to do a pretty popular requested video that a lot of people were asking for, and that again, I was going to do anyway, and that is Sinbad versus Yhwach from Bleach. Because both of these characters are extremely overpowered, they both have a ton of different abilities that they're packing, and obviously when I talk about one OP character like Sinbad, people are like, well, how does that do against, Bleach's OP powerhouse in Yhwach? So we're going to talk about that in today's video. If you enjoy Bleach power scaling or just power scaling in general, that's basically all we do over here on the Bleach Hub channel. It's really becoming Bleach power scaling and then just really OP random characters. So if you're looking forward to just other random characters getting covered in the future, like Medaka, Dark Schneider, might even touch Reinhardt if I can bother myself to read that much, then make sure you leave a like on the video and you subscribe to the channel. You can also click that join button and become a channel member if you're finding out that you just don't have enough content over here on the Bleach Hub channel, because becoming a member gives you access to all past live streams, and you'll get to see all of the debates that I've uploaded in the past and that I will upload in the future. So consider clicking that join button if that tickles your pickle. But with that being said, you guys know how we do things over here on the Bleach Hub channel. We're going to go over both characters' strength, speed, and ability. So, strap in. This is going to be a bit of a longer one because, both Sinbad and Yhwach have like Bible chapters for abilities. But on that note, let's just dive right into this, starting off with Sinbad Strength. So there's really two ways you can scale Sinbad. First is like the base normal Sinbad in the normal world, quote unquote, basically the one that's not the godly apparition Sinbad that exists in the Sacred Palace. The normal Sinbad should scale to at least being 4th dimensional, as the Rook is stated to be a higher dimensional ability, and that's literally the fodder equivalent to Ki, Ryatsu, Chakra. It is just the base for all power systems in the series of Magi, and just general Rook blasts are considered to be extremely low tier. And again, they are said to be a higher dimensional construct. If you want a more in-depth explanation for the Rook and kind of all the lore for that, you can check out the Sinbad video. But that's generally how it breaks down for Sinbad in just his base normal form. But then we get to the God Sinbad, and it's also pretty easy to scale, because essentially Sinbad puts himself at the top of the god hierarchy. And how the god hierarchy works in Magi is that each god surpasses the last god by one-dimensional transcendence, and this goes on ad infinitum, and essentially Sinbad puts himself at the top of said hierarchy. So if we're using God Sinbad, you have him being like at the highest tier of hyperversal. You can also speculate and say that maybe he breaks into 1A or outer versal, for those of you not in the know, because what Sinbad eventually wants to do with David is transcend the infinite dimensional hierarchy and break into an even higher level. So you can argue that they're trying to get into like the 1A outer versal tier, but they never actually do that. They're stopped before they can actually do said plan. So the safest way to scale them is to say that base, because of the Rook scaling, they're about 4D, and then the God Sinbad is infinite hyperversal, or the top tier of hyperversal. There is a little bit of nuance. Again, you can check out the Sinbad video where I go into more of an explanation of why the Rook is as strong as it is, and it's actually could potentially be stronger than that as well. And then conversely, looking at Sinbad's opponent, Yhwach is also pretty easy to scale. Thankfully, he has some of the most blatant feats in the Bleach verse. So again, two different ways you could scale Yhwach. You could either just use blatantly his feat that he's going to destroy the universe, and just say that Yhwach is universal because he's destroying everything within the Bleach universe. This is something that does get confused, by the way. People try to argue that Yhwach is multiversal without really understanding what the term multiversal means. It's actually more apt to say that he's multi-universal, not multiversal. They're actually two different things. One is destroying numerous universes, and the other one is destroying a multiverse, which is a construct that holds in numerous other 4th dimensional constructs. Basically, how it breaks down and why it's actually 5D and why it's much more impressive is you have our infinite 3D space, like that's where we live, and then you have a 4th dimensional construct that holds all that together, because a 4th dimensional construct would be more than infinitely larger than the infinite 3D space, and thus is able to contain it. Now, to contain an infinite amount of 4D spaces, you need something that's infinitely larger than that 4th dimensional space. Thus, you have a 5-dimensional construct that holds that in, and that's what's considered to be a multiverse. So when you look at Bleach, it's more apparent that Yhwach is performing a multi-universe feat where he's destroying maybe even at best a couple 4D constructs, but he's not actually destroying what would be considered to be a multiverse. And I think that's where people kind of get tied up on the definitions and maybe just don't understand the different definitions. So Yhwach, you could argue, is universal, multi-universal, 4D, kind of however you want to break that down, as there are some like time-space statements in the Bleach series. but 5D is a little bit of a stretch unless you're using the Hellverse translations, where the words used by Kubo to describe Hell applies to space-time theory, but it's not exactly confirmed, as some people that I've talked to kind of disagree on how those translations come out, so that can be more of like your own personal interpretation or personal argument, since I'm already having people disagree on the translation, so that can just be your own thing that you argue. Speed is also pretty simple for both parties. I mean, Sinbad just blatantly exists in places that have no time. You have things like the Sacred Palace, the Dark Continent, the Lair of the Ancient Dragons. All are areas that don't have time in them, and moving in areas that don't have time would be a quantifier for inaccessible speed. Oddly enough, there's really no feats for anything higher than that. You would expect these like higher dimensional beings to even crack into immeasurable speed, because that's kind of how things work out, but they really don't crack into those tiers. There's no random time traveling or moving through non-linear time or anything weird like that. It's really odd that they just kind of cap out at inaccessible speed, but look, I'm just the messenger, alright? I'm just the guy that read the series, and I'm telling you guys what this guy can do. Then we have Yhwach, who at the very best you could also argue has inaccessible speed. We have to do some really weird minutia with the Dongai Precipice world, and you have to argue that because the Cleaner is like the Lord of Time and Space inside of the Dongai Precipice world, that when he dies, time no longer flows in the Dongai. Even though if there was no time in the Dongai, Ichigo and Isshin would literally have left the Dongai by the time Aizen and Gin also left the Dongai. There is some weird like filler showings where we might be able to argue that like characters like Ichigo have immeasurable speed, because if you guys remember in the Reigai arc, Ichigo actually goes like back and forward in time. He like creates this infinite time loop paradox where Ichigo is the one that comes and saves himself in the Dongai Precipice world. So if you want to include filler, which is arguably canon to the manga, I know I've heard a lot of arguments of people saying that they think the filler in the manga should be applicable because things like Camp for Your Own World reference the Zanpakuto Rebellion arc, and we actually have references in the manga to the first Bleach movie. So if you want to argue that that filler should be canon, then you could say that people like Ichigo have immeasurable speed, but outside of that, you just have the good old Soul Palace Ichigo flying feat, where he flies down from the Soul Palace to the Serite. We use that to calculate the distance between the two because he's traveling at bare minimum the speed of light for about half a day, which means the gap between both of the areas is absolutely massive. Although it's pretty consistently put at it being about like a few solar systems in length, although I've seen some pretty ridiculous calculations where people get it to be multi-galaxy distance in length, which is pretty absurd, and it makes the following feat just even more impressive depending on how big you think the distance is, because you have the Ashwallen Light and the Mime Hage both being able to travel said distance in like 2.5 seconds. And then not only do you have more fodder stern readers like Latato being able to react to the Ashwallen Light, but you have Yhwach himself being able to grab the Mime Hage and just blatantly react to it. So if you want to include the filler and kind of all the weird stuff, you can get them to being immeasurable speed, but if not, they're just going to be very, very high into MFTL. Now, abilities is where this thing actually starts to get pretty interesting, because both Yhwach and Sinbad have a version of fate manipulation, or they have a fate hacks. Sinbad's fate ability is that he's able to see the flow of fate, and he's able to always make the correct decision, so he always reaches his goal, whereas Yhwach changes timelines, where he sees that, oh, this is a better outcome than what I'm currently getting, let me swap timelines and get that outcome instead of my current outcome. For instance, in the current timeline, Yhwach gets chopped up by Ichigo, so he swaps to a different timeline where he does not die. I would give Sinbad's ability the slight edge in this category though, because Sinbad himself is actually unbound by fate. That's kind of why he's a first-class singularity, and why he's kind of a big deal in the Mangiverse, because not only can he see his own fate, but he's unbound by his own fate, and he can pretty much do whatever he wants. Nothing is predestined for him. Now, those are the two major abilities out of the way. Both of them have some ability to manipulate souls. You know, Sinbad has the ability to manipulate the Rook, which the Rook is basically the soul of all living things on the planet. Yhwach is a Quincy, which is basically a human person that is able to manipulate Ryotsu, which is like the soul power of the Bleach verse. He can fight astral beings, he can see them perfectly fine. He even has Quincy arrows that can erase such astral beings out of existence, so they both have the ability to interact with each other. Nobody should be pulling out any weird soul hacks against one another. They both have odd elemental abilities. Sinbad with some of his Jin, like say Ball, which is considered to be his main Jin, or you have Yhwach who has some elemental abilities with say Bazby's ability or Kangdu's ability where you can manipulate iron. And then they both have some like random really OP hacks abilities in their back pocket. So for Sinbad, the thing that most people go for is probably going to be the Ice Djinn, which allows him to just completely weaken his opponent by an actual absurd amount. You can actually argue that he weakens them by nearly an infinite amount, since he weakens people to such a degree that they perceive him as teleporting, which teleporting is instantaneous movement, so you can argue that he's weakening them by an infinite amount. And then he also has Zapar, which basically he does a little bit of a screech, and he now can completely control the person that he used the screech attack on. Like, basically you hear the ability and your mind is taken over by Sinbad. It's literally Shisui Uchiha's MS ability, but on crack cocaine. But Sinbad's not the only person that has some pretty OP abilities. You also have Yhwach, who, if we're allowing him to use all the different scripts, is basically immortal with things like the zombie and the miracle, although it's arguable as to whether or not he can use the miracle's ability, because that comes from the Soul King, but he absorbed the Soul King. I've seen some debates on that, but should be fine for him to use if, you know, he absorbs the main Soul King, and then he also gives the Soul King's body parts different powers. He should be able to use it. He should also be able to become intangible if he steals Lille's ability. He has permanent adaptability if he steals Pernita's ability. Really OP instantaneous killing poison with Askin's ability. Asnot gives him insane fear hacks. Just a whole different laundry list of different abilities that both of them can pull out. But who's going to ultimately win at the end of the day? And I think that's a little obvious. So if we're taking God Sinbad and having him fight against normal Yhwach or even the almighty Yhwach, I'm pretty sure everybody acknowledges that that's a stomp. Even if we just giga-wanked Yhwach and used like the eyes in higher dimensional statements and said that Yhwach is like an 8-dimensional being, really doesn't matter because Sinbad transcends the infinite dimensional hierarchy, so literally no matter what Yhwach does, he's just going to get the boot. But then normal Sinbad versus Yhwach is a bit more contestable, since their powers match up really well for each other. Depending on how you argue things, if you're taking in filler, Yhwach actually might have the speed advantage, and if he has the speed advantage, he might win. But if he doesn't have the weird filler arguments for his speed, then he's definitely going to be slower than Sinbad, and then Sinbad gets his ability off first, and then Sinbad wins. So that's really what the base form comes down to, is like, are you going to argue that Yhwach has the weird filler feats and thus makes him faster, or not? Because he really needs that speed to actually get the ability off first. Because a lot of their abilities are going to cancel each other out. Like, they can't use their soul powers against each other because they both have like the same level of soul resistance. They both have fate manipulation, although I would argue Sinbad's is a little bit better. I don't think it's enough to just give him the guaranteed W, because that just means that he's going to be unaffected by the Almighty, but that still means that Yhwach himself can still jump himself from different timelines. So he doesn't just have to use the Almighty to affect Sinbad, he can use it to keep himself alive, which is why I don't think that even though Sinbad has the superior fate hacks, that it completely shuts down the Almighty, because the Almighty is not just simply an offensive ability, it's also very defensive as well. Then they both just have all these like weird elemental abilities that I don't think they're going to bring out anyway, but I mean they should cancel each other out anyway. Even if they do decide to like shoot burner fingers and Baradak Psychas at each other, if they're both around the same 4th dimensional level of power, it shouldn't really matter. And then it just comes down to who gets their OP hacks ability off first. Does Sinbad use Valifor to just completely negate Yhwach and just weaken him down by an infinitesimal amount and then just destroys him there? Does he scream with Zapar and just win through a mind hacks? Or does Yhwach poison and kill Sinbad with Askin's ability? Does he put him under a fear hacks with Asnot's? Maybe takes over his body with Giselle's ability, or maybe things get a little hot and steamy with Pepe's ability. These are all pretty valid, and again, it just does come down to who gets their ability off first. Now, if we equalize speed, then it actually just becomes, who do you think in character is going to use the OP ability first? And then I think Sinbad would definitely use his in character more than Yhwach would, as Yhwach never used any of the other scripts in character. So then if we equalize speed, I think it actually makes it more cut and dry that Sinbad would win, but you can argue again that Yhwach could get the speed advantage and then get his ability off first, but you do gotta argue some weird filler nonsense and whether or not the Magi arc is canon to the manga, which really hasn't been confirmed yet as of right now. We have some confirmation for other things being canon, just the Magi arc is a little dicey right now, but with that being said, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I'm also down to do some more Magi versus Bleach matchups, because there's a lot of other really cool characters in Magi that I think could match up with Bleach characters. Not too many of the Magi characters actually scale to being the insanely powerful, infinite dimensional transcending god Sinbad. It's a very small handful of characters that actually do that. And then even then you could exclude those forms and just use their normal forms. So yeah, you could take most of the Magi characters and have them fight a lot of the Bleach top tiers and actually have a really fun versus debate. So let me know any suggestions that you guys would want to see in the comments down below, or maybe some other verses that you want to see Magi go up against. You know, we could do Sinbad versus Hagoromo, we could do Sinbad versus Kaguya, you know. I know the Naruto fans are sitting on the side being like, oh yeah, Yhwach just got beat by Sinbad. Hey, why are you laughing over there, buddy? What if Sinbad comes strolling up to your verse too, huh? Yeah, it ain't so funny now, bro. Sinbad pulls up and everyone stops laughing. But with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace late, guys.